Okay, before we get started, I would recommend that you go to the video description and go and grab the GitHub links from the description. I generally design these to be a walkthrough where we can walk through these together. So I would suggest that you go ahead and do that. So this series is a complementary series to the simple AWS containers video that we did just last week. And in that video, we essentially deployed a set of Flask-based microservices using containers in AWS. And so that consisted of creating an ECR, Elastic Cloud Registry, and Elastic Container Registry. I'll get that right eventually. And then we built a Docker image based on Ubuntu and pushed that Docker image with the Flask microservices into that ECR repository. And then the third step would we deploy that as as an app runner instance. So we build the repository, push a container in it, and then actually instantiate an instance using app runner. Now, GitHub Actions is, we talk about CI/CD. That's a set of modern development principles for how we build and deliver software. So what GitHub Actions is essentially one of the tools that allows you to implement those principles in real life. It's one of many. GitHub Actions are really cool. We're going to just stretch the surface here. You can have it so that when you just push code, it actually runs your code or runs the build automatically. So there's a lot to this, and this is just sort of a gentle introduction using this very simple container example. And so what we're going to do is walk through all the steps for you to clone our repository and then configure GitHub Actions and run a build, and we'll look at the build. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is we want to go to the repository. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to clone this repository from this use the template. So all our projects are template repositories. So you click on here and you just say create new repository. And I'm going to call this AWS Action Demo. All right, this is going to be demo repository. I probably would make this private since you're doing builds, but that's up to you. I generally, if I'm going to put secrets or anything, I make my project private. So let's create the repository, and it's generating the repository. All right, now it's done. So the next step is to actually pull this repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to here and I'm going to say, let's clone SSH, copy that here, and then we're going to go and build this within our development environment. All right, so we'll go back to my development environment and I'm going to do git clone, and I think I redid the copy and paste there by accident, so I'm going to make that git clone the new repository, and let's see AWS Action Demo. So we've cloned the repository, and now it's up to us to make the modifications. So let's go back to the documentation. The next step, I do believe, is to run Terraform apply on the backend directory. Well, let's go ahead and do that. So let me go back to the development environment and do check env, and that's going to make sure I have everything set up for this environment. And then from that, I'm going to go to cd backend, and I've got a simple main.tf file. And what I'll do is I'll do a Terraform init, and then we'll do a Terraform apply. Click yes, and it will proceed to build the S3 bucket. So, what are we using this S3 bucket for? What is a backend? You may wonder. Well, what it basically is when you do a Terraform build, there's this file called Terraform tf-state. And this is what maintains the state of the build compared to what's in the account. So when you do a plan or apply, this is what it's comparing. It's comparing the state file with what actually is built. Now, this is my own directory, so I can't share this. And so what we're doing is we're creating an S3 bucket, and within that S3 bucket, we're going to write that Terraform file. So to do that, this build built the S3 bucket, and now we need to go configure it. Now this build also builds a configuration file. So if I back up and I go to the ECR directory, you'll see that it created this new file called 01 ECR backend from that build. So if I go ECR backend TF, you'll see that it is specifying what bucket to use. I use my account number and that because you have to have a unique name for a bucket. And then I have a key which effectively looks like a directory and say this is where I want my Terraform TS state file to go. So it created the build that we ran before, created that S3 bucket, but it also created these backend files. So if I go and back up to App Runner, you will see that that's also there, and I just use a slightly different directory for that. So at this point, go back to the documentation. What we need to do is we've built the backend. We've kind of looked at the backend to see what they look like, and they're going to a TF state and that good stuff. Now we need to push those backend files into our new project. So let me go back into here, and I'm going to do git add, git commit, add backend files. All right, and then we hit git push. You see it's creating the two files that we created there. So let's do a git push and git push. And now that's in the project. So if I go back and look at the project, you will see we're in, this is my clone. And if you go to ECR, you will see that file is now there now. So both places. So let's go back to the documentation. Next step is number 5. That's to configure the GitHub secrets for the build process. And so what we need to do is, since we're in AWS, we've got these 3 secret values. So let's go back to our project, and we're going to go to settings, and we're going to go to secrets and variables, and go to actions, and I'm going to say new repository secret, and I'm going to do something relatively innocuous. I'm going to say region. So I'm going to go region, and it's going to be US US East 2. So that's going to be the region IDO, and I hit add. Now what I need to do is create all the other 2, and I'm not going to show you my secrets, so I'm going to hit pause and go ahead and add them. Okay, I've added my 3 secret values. This is the sort of information you want to keep secure. And so once I've added them, let's go to actions. Now let's baby step this. Let's run the check environment build. So I'm checking environment build. I'm going to say run workflow. And let's see here, hit refresh. You're going to see it run. And what this build does is it's going to go through and install everything it needs to install. And then it's going to, like, Terraform, Docker. I put Packer in here. This project is using Packer, but if you're going to use this project as a starting point with other projects, I figured it would be good to show you how to install Packer. Then it's going to end up running the validate script. And so it's going to make sure all the required variables are set, and we set them. It's going to show you the versions of the tools that we're using, Terraform, Docker, the AWS CLI. It's going to make sure it can connect with those credentials and that all the backend files exist. So if you forgot to push the backend files, it's going to say, hey, you got to have a backend to run within this environment. So that is it for the check env. So let's go back to the last one, the last list. And now let's do the big kahuna. Let's run the build. So I'm going to hit build, and we'll set run workflow. Hit refresh, and what you're going to see is the 3 phases that we keep talking about. You build the repository, you build the Flask container, then you build the app runner instance, and then we validate. So at this point, you just need to wait. It takes, I think, about 6 minutes, but we'll see in a minute. And we'll pause here. Okay, so while the build has happened, let's look at where these workflows exist. And essentially, you create this special directory within GitHub, within your project, .github-workflows, and that's where you put these YAML files that describe the builds. Now, I'm a big proponent of all these AI tools, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this guy right here, and let's copy the raw file, and I'm going to go over to Mr. GPT and say, tell me, give me a summary of what this action does. And hopefully, here we go. So effectively, it's going to tell you, hey, you got deploy phase 1. It tells you exactly what to do. So this is a great tool for you. If you're just given software or you know things you need to figure out, you can just throw it in here and say, hey, tell me what this does. Now, the biggest thing is if you go into these files, there's the setup of the environment variables. Then there's also, these different jobs. But at the end of the day, what it is it's a shell script. You're running bash scripts. So I almost take the exact, like, applied as a H. The approach that I usually take is I create shell scripts for my builds. And then I just take those shell scripts and lift them totally and put them in these pipelines. There is some tweaking that you need to do, but they flow very, very nicely. So this is just basically another way of running your bash code to do the build, but it's managed by GitHub. So that's just a brief overview of what these files looks like. Now let's get back to the build. Okay, the build has completed. We're sort of looking at if you look at the high-level summary, if you click on the individual components, so you build ECR, it sets up everything. The apply Terraform, this is where the shell script that's the apply.sh is essentially lifted and put in. And you can see you can get pretty much the same output. Same with the build Flask container. This is going to be the build Flask container, which is the part. It's going to be the Docker part. This is the one that's huge, where it's building the Docker information. And at the end, it is pushing it into your ECR registry. Then the third phase is we actually instantiate and run the code. It's again also, if you look at the apply.sh, it's just taking that code and running it. So you see very similar output. So we are going to run validate, and you can see it's going to give you the full URL. I'm going to click on that or copy that, and I'm going to go to here and say bam, and that's going to give me my good to go endpoint. That's sort of the smoke test. Everything else at this point can work the same. You could go use Postman to exercise these endpoints, but that's not really the focus of this. So we'll probably just leave it at here. The last part is you want to be good stewards of your cloud accounts. So I'm going to go click on do destroy, and I'm going to run that workflow, and then that's going to destroy this product or this project. So that's it for setting up those 4 actions in AWS. We also have an Azure and GCP example.